She thought she was walking into the worst date of her life. She had no idea she was walking into the rest of it. The night was cold, and the city lights blinked like tired stars over the rooftops. In the back of a rideshare car, a young woman sat with her arms crossed, watching the streets blur past, her stomach twisted into a knot of doubt. She had imagined her first real date to feel like something out of a movie. Instead, the man she was about to meet had picked the cheapest, most run-down diner on the edge of town. The neon sign above the entrance buzzed and flickered. One letter completely burned out, as if even the building itself was ashamed to be seen. Her chest tightened. Was this really worth her time? If you believe that real love isn't measured by money, that kindness matters more than status, and that everyone deserves a second chance, stay with this story until the end. Because what happens inside that diner will stay with you long after the video ends. Her name was Lily Parker, 23 years old, soft-spoken, and quietly carrying scars that most people never saw. She worked behind the counter of a small, dusty bookstore, watching others live lives she only ever read about. Her clothes were second-hand, carefully mended, her shoes worn thin. But her eyes told a different story, eyes that carried both quiet sorrow and stubborn hope. The man waiting for her was Daniel Brooks, a construction worker in his late 20s. He wasn't smooth-talking or polished, but weeks earlier, her car had died outside the bookstore, and Daniel, a stranger passing by, had knelt in the freezing cold and fixed it without asking for a single dollar. His hands were rough, his jeans work stained, but his smile was warm and honest. That smile was the reason she said yes when he nervously asked her to dinner. Now here she stood, staring at the chipped paint on the diner's door, her stomach sinking with every second. He doesn't have much, she reminded herself, and neither do I. Maybe this really is all he can give. Inside, the diner smelled like frying oil and burnt coffee. An old jukebox played a love song nobody was listening to. Tired truck drivers sat hunched over their plates at the counter. Daniel led her to a booth by the window, his steps careful, nervous, like he was bracing for her to walk out any moment. He opened the menu for her like it was a treasure map, glancing up with a shy smile that seemed to say, "This is the best I have to offer you." At first, Lily's heart sank even further. Cheap burgers, watery pancakes, greasy fries, that was the whole menu. But then she noticed something. Daniel wasn't looking at the food at all. He was looking at her, like the simple fact that she'd shown up meant more to him than any five-star restaurant ever could. There was gratitude in his eyes, quiet and aching. Slowly, Lily began to soften. They ordered simple meals and stumbled through awkward small talk before the conversation finally opened up. Daniel told her about his father, who had died when he was a boy, forcing him to grow up fast and raise his younger brother alone. Lily shared how her mother had worked 2 exhausting jobs just to keep food on the table, and how she'd promised herself never to judge anyone by the weight of their wallet. Bit by bit, the greasy tables and flickering neon faded into the background as 2 strangers quietly opened pieces of themselves to each other. Lily noticed how Daniel's face lit up when he spoke about one day starting his own construction company, building affordable homes for families who could never dream of owning one. Daniel noticed the quiet steel in her voice when she talked about wanting to finish her degree, even while working double shifts just to survive. Then came the moment that changed everything. An elderly couple shuffled into the diner, frail and slow, the woman gripping her husband's arm like the ground might give way beneath her. When the waitress approached their booth, the couple quietly admitted they could only afford to split 1 plate between them. Daniel went still. Then, without a word, he walked to the counter, pulled out his thin, worn wallet, and quietly paid for the couple's full meal, asking the waitress to keep it between them. Lily sat frozen, stunned. In that instant, she understood exactly why Daniel had brought her here. Not because he didn't care enough to try harder, but because he wanted her to see him exactly as he was, a man with almost nothing in his pocket, but a heart that gave anyway. Her eyes stung with tears. She quickly blinked away. This was a man who gave even when he had almost nothing left to give. A man who would never let her feel invisible in a world that so often overlooks people like them. As the night stretched on, Daniel admitted he'd been quietly saving every spare dollar for years, not for himself, but to put his younger brother through school. Lily confessed her deepest fear of never being enough for anyone who mattered. And instead of flinching away, Daniel looked her straight in the eyes and told her she was more than enough. What happened next caught everyone in that diner off guard. Lily stood up, cheeks flushed, and wrapped her arms around Daniel right there in the middle of the restaurant. The truck drivers turned to look. The waitress froze mid-step. Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't the kind of hug people share on a first date. It was two people who had spent their whole lives waiting to finally be seen. Finally being seen, that forgotten little diner suddenly felt like sacred ground. It had nothing to do with the food or the address. It was raw, unfiltered love, the kind that never needed wealth to prove itself real. Word of that night spread quietly through the neighborhood. People began talking about the young man who had almost nothing yet gave everything, and the young woman who learned to look past the surface of things. That single night became proof that love was never about candlelit tables or expensive menus. It only ever needed two people brave enough to truly see each other. Lily and Daniel kept meeting after that, always somewhere simple, and their bond only deepened with time. Daniel introduced her to his younger brother, who adored her instantly. She became the missing piece of their small, tight-knit family, and for the first time in her life, Lily felt cherished, not for her looks or her possessions, but for exactly who she was. Years later, when Daniel finally saved enough to launch his own construction company, the very first house he built wasn't for profit. It was a modest home, built with his own two hands, the place where he and Lily would begin their life together. On the day they moved in, they made one stop first, that same worn-down diner, not because they couldn't afford anywhere nicer anymore, but because that little diner had been the beginning of everything that mattered. The waitress, older now but still working the same counter, recognized them instantly. As she set their food down, she leaned in and whispered, "I knew from that very first night you two were going to make it." If this story moved something in you, like this video, send it to someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. And before you go, one question for the comments. Would you choose real love in a run-down diner over luxury without sincerity? Tell us below. We read every single answer. Because sometimes the smallest, most forgotten places hold the biggest miracles of all.